Madam Secretary, is there a quorum?
It looks like there is a quorum.
All right, very good, very good. With that, we will discuss the minutes of the October 28th meeting. Are there any questions or comments reference to the committee meeting of October 28th? Hearing no comments, if you agree with that, please use the raise hand function to vote your approval for the minutes of October 28th. I'll give everybody another 30 seconds to make sure your hand is raised. Madam Secretary, are the minutes of October 28th approved? You're muted.
Yes. Are some people abstaining? I think Mr. Simmons is trying to talk. He's trying to share. He can't talk. You can raise your hand.
He's probably raising his hand to vote for it. Some people may not know where the raise hand feature is.
Okay. But it looks like yes.
Okay. Thank you. If everybody could lower their hand, please. And if everybody can look at the agenda for tonight, which is the same as what we have planned for last week. If you approve those, the meeting agenda for tonight, please raise your hand. If not, please indicate that you have comments by just unmuting yourself and asking for any comments or modifications to tonight's agenda. And I'll give everybody another 30 seconds. Madam Secretary, were there enough votes to approve the agenda for tonight?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if everybody would lower your hand, please. Our public comment section, we have three statements for public comment. I will read them and in order of alphabetical order. The first one is from Ms. Jackie Brinkman, who is an organizer for End Racism, FCPS.
Excuse me, Marv, you to read the public comment statement first. I think it's the next slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I always forget that. 1 second here. The board welcomes and encourages public comment. Public comments will be read for up to 30 minutes. However, all public comment, whether read or not, will be posted on board document in 24 hours of the meeting. Please note that public comment is for statements and questions that will be directed to the appropriate staff for response. Public comment is not intended to be a question and answer platform with the board. The board will not respond to any comments made. With that, I will read the first comment, which, as I said, came from Miss Jackie Brinkman, who is an organizer for End Racism FCPS. And this is in context to the Board of Education meeting that occurred on December the 9th. Around timestamp 130 to 117 in the Board of Education meeting that took place on December the 9th, regarding increased budget for SRO overtime, it was unclear whether or not SROs are actually conducting these home visits for students of concern and how often this is happening. It was explained that this budget increase did not include an expansion of duties. However, Scott conflicts himself at 129 when he states that the program is looking for additional opportunities to include law enforcement skill set in more scenarios in FCPS. This does indicate an expansion of job duties, does it not? It was also argued by Dr. Alban that these visits are a last resort. If this is true, then please tell us. And there's several questions here. The first question is, how often are students receiving home visits from SROs? The second question is, who decides which students receive home visits from SROs? The third question is, why are school counselors, psychologists, and social workers not the designated staff for this job duty? Why were SROs chosen? The fourth question and comment is, if the Fayette County Sheriff's Office SROs pursue a student who they believe lives in a household with undocumented parents, where does the job duty of the SRO end and the Fayette County Sheriff's Office officer begin? At 1:35, Brad Young explained that SROs have officer duties and SRO duties, but they intersect when the officer is in the community. This is extremely misleading in terms of what students should expect when interacting with these individuals in their communities. Is there any reason why officers should not be documenting when they are present in the communities where they are to serve schools? The argument that this part of their day-to-day duties is insufficient. In other words, what protections does a student and their family have in these scenarios? The board should not be taking the action of sending an SRO to a student's place of residence lightly. Question number 5. What are the limits of arresting powers for SROs in these home visits? Question number 6. How often do SROs conduct home visits on their own without support of other administrators? We recommend that the Racial Equity Committee look at how many students and families have been affected by the intersecting interests of the SRO program and the 287G program run by the Frederick County Sheriff's Office. We want further elaboration from the organizers of the SRO program as to what happens in scenarios when a family is suspected of committing an abuse, neglect, or dealing with substance abuse in the household. Again, what protections do the families have in regards to these visits? We understand if not all this can be answered in this meeting. However, we would like these answers at a later time via email or otherwise. Thank you for your time. Jackie Brinkman, organizer of End Racism FCPS. Our second comment is from Miss Lisa Broomfield from Middletown. I am very concerned to learn from an article in the Frederick News Post that SROs are at times being sent to homes of students who are not logging in on the virtual learning environment. This is not a practice that engages parents or students with work with Frederick County Public Schools, and quite possibly is frightening and threatening experience for the students, for the kids as well, especially kids in the immigrant community. It is not appropriate to send law enforcement to the home of a student who is having issues with utilizing the virtual learning environment. This action will diminish trust between some folks in the community and the Frederick County Public Schools at a time when trust and collaboration are necessary for success. Thank you for your consideration, Ms. Lisa Broomfield, Middletown. And the third comment that we received, one second, I'll pull it up here. The members of SURJ Frederick are hoping the Fayette County Public Schools will see the great need for follow-up and guiding in the guidance by race and racism, having conversation and ensuring that social emotional well-being of students and staff to this incident at a high school. The description of a student request that a Black Lives Matter flag be removed from another student's Zoom field reveals that she was shamed, not for her words, by the teacher who stated that the student with the banner was just fine, and then turned off the offended student's chat function. Despite the teacher asking the student with the banner to turn off his camera, and presumably her ability to turn off his camera from her end, the flag was displayed for the remainder of the class. Is this an appropriate takeaway for the students involved? If it is, the message given is Blue Lives Matter. And if you are a student who speaks up about racial concern in your chat, you'll be turned off and your concern dismissed. The teacher's action communicated to the class that the young woman's feelings and opinions don't matter, and then punished her for sharing her desire to have something offensive to her removed from the school environment. Because this treatment of the student who asked the banner be removed exhibits racism, it is important to provide her with support and to have that difficult conversation with the teacher and the other student on how to better handle similar situations in the future. The teacher should also be guided in having an apologetic conversation with the student. While the guide is definitely a positive development in achieving racial equity in the Frederick County Public Schools, SURJ wonders if the release of the guide was preceded by or followed with any teacher training. Is there something teachers are taught to do or say in situations where students are disagreeing about what constitutes racism, racist actions, statements, or representations? While there have been incidents, language and behavior at FCPS in the past that a vast majority of people would agree were racist, in this case, many students and teachers would feel that there was nothing wrong with displaying the banner. Members of SURJ would argue that because this is appropriate, Black Lives Matter, and the phrase Blue Lives Matter is indeed a racist response meant to deny validity of and the need for Black Lives Matter movement. Blue Lives Matter is also criticized as racist for promoting racist legislation. This legislation would make it a hate crime to kill police officers and supports the system of discriminating policies. It is a lot to ask a teacher with no training or understanding around racism or white privilege to manage this sort of incident well. Being predominantly white, FCPS likely has many students who have never been asked to hear the perspective of people of color or to see how our society favors whiteness. They, like the adult community, may have a lot of disagreement about what constitutes racism and whether they engage in any racist behavior. While we understand that you cannot discuss personnel issues publicly, you can share your process and answer the following questions that would help families of color know what to expect and how or whether their children will be supported. Revealing your process will also model the community for how to approach difficult conversations that are so important in moving forward racial equity at FCPS and in the larger community. Do you have a policy around what is seen on a student's Zoom screen or around display of political or potential offensive statements, logos, or sentiments in general? Have you done any training to guide teachers in leading or planning for difficult conversations around the issue of racism? Ideological training or work to increase understanding is not enough. Teachers are faced with, how do I handle this situation, and probably need help. Is there someone whom teachers and students can reach out around these issues who is there to help, not judge or condemn? Is there a time or place for these conversations to take place with proper support and guidance? Do you have a policy for how teachers should address online material that has not been pre-evaluated as acceptable or non-acceptable, particularly material that is construed as racist by some individuals? Without guidance, as happened in this incident, teachers face issues around racism might actually further the message so often rather than receive the message. Excuse me, let me read this over again. Without guidance, as happened in this incident, teachers face issues around racism might actually further the message so often received by students of color in and out of school that their opinions, their feelings, and indeed their lives do not matter. We understand this is an exceptionally challenging time for teachers, students, and FCPS, but it's imperative that FCPS trains teachers to provide safe, nurturing environment to all students, and that all students are able to speak about a problem without being dismissed or unheard. Sincerely, SURJ Frederick. And I must caveat this with a statement that this statement was submitted on October 26th, and the incident was addressed and followed up with conversations with these two students, their parents, and the teacher. The names in school were redacted, and additionally, there was discussion about the issue with the entire class. Questions were referred to the superintendent, and answers were submitted directly to SURJ. but because it was sent to us, I thought everybody should hear those statements. With that, we will go to our next slide, please. And at this point in time, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Janine Beck. She's going to talk to us a little bit about her favorite topic and what she does for our school district as a professional. So without further ado, Ms. Beck, please, or is it Dr. Beck or Ms. Beck? You're muted. Did we lose her?
We may have.
Okay, we'll wait 1 second for her to come back.
All right, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can, Janine, thank you.
I am actually on 2 devices, and so I'm glad one of them is working. I can see you on both of my devices, however. So thank you. I am Janine Beck, Miss Janine Beck. I am not doctor yet. I am working on that at GW. And so hopefully I will get that accomplished in the next year or so. I'm here. I am the achievement specialist for school culture. And can you see me on camera there or no? Probably not. There we go. Hello. All right, so I'm gonna sign off of the other device because you can't see me there. So I'm here to talk about restorative practices. I serve as the achievement specialist for school culture. I served previously at Ballinger Creek Middle School as the principal, and prior to that, I spent some time in Montgomery County. I'm excited because I really love climate, and I'm excited to be here to talk to you about it. I was looking through your notes and your documents from previous meetings, and I understand that the restorative practices lens falls within the climate and school climate. However, I'm glad to see so many familiar faces on this call who have been trained, who have expert knowledge in restorative practices, so we can make this very collaborative. Some of you will probably be in my presentation as well. So I am going to attempt to pull up the presentation, but before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and model restorative practices. And so while I'm trying to pull up the presentation, in the comment on the chat, please drop one word that describes your day today. Busy. Busy is a popular one. Rewarding, multitasking. I am attempting to rejoin the meeting on this computer so that I can pull it up. All right, can you see me on the other camera now? Because I'm prepared to pull the presentation up on that one. All right, thank you, Dawn, for that head nod. All right, I'm going to present now the screen. As you can see, you have already built a little bit of community with each other to see how everyone's day was. I see fruitful, I see chaotic, I see people just keeping it all the way real. And that's what restorative practices can do in a community. It allows all stakeholders, whether you know each other or not, to feel connected, to build relationships, and to allow our educators, teachers, principals, custodians, whoever the adult is interacting with an individual, to have strategies that are consistent and equitable while they're interacting with others. So I am looking to pull this presentation up now. And I'm sharing my screen. Let me know when you can see the entire screen. All right, are we good? I need someone to unmute and say yes, because I cannot see you since I've logged off the other one.
You are good.
I'm presuming that everyone can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Our outcomes are to discuss what is restorative practices, why or we doing restorative practices in FCPS? Where are we doing restorative practices? And what is next with restorative practices? Then we'll end with some questions about restorative practices. Just want to check in. So first, when I define, or when the IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices, defines what restorative practices are, it's defined as an approach to building a positive school climate and having school discipline that is also positive in nature. A restorative approach will combine relationships, having a relationship-focused mindset with the distinctive tools for creating a climate and culture that is inherently just, racially equitable, and conducive to learning for all students. And so we've already done one example of how a school, a community, a team, a group of parents can build community with themselves and with others. So the best thing about being a restorative and implementing a restorative approach is that it's proactive. It's a proactive way to manage behavior. As a school leader, I've been in probably about 8 schools, serving from a science teacher to a STEP team coach, to a homework club sponsor, to an assistant principal, to an alternative teacher. And in each of those buildings, it was very important to make sure that there was a culture of kindness, respect, and also trusting relationships. We always want to make sure that our children come to school, which they spend a lot of time at school, have a trusted relationship with at least one adult and hopefully more than one. And so whether it's their SRO or whether it's their teacher or counselor, we want to make sure that when there are conflicts that arise in a school building, as we know they will, there is someone that they feel that they can trust, they can confide in, and that they will help them navigate conflict. Restorative practices is being used across the world to help schools, organizations to have consistent language and consistent practices in order to build relationships, to repair relationships, to restore relationships when we have conflict. And so as a leader, I feel that the most important reason that we have restorative practices in place in many of our schools at FCPS is to ensure that we are using equitable strategies and that we're involving all stakeholders. Restorative practices is aligned with aspirational goals number 4 and 5, nurturing relationships with families, our community, sharing responsibility for student success. Aspirational goal 5, promoting a culture of civility, wellness, fostering wellness. All of these things are important, especially with today's climate. Looking at your board policies and regulations that you've already reviewed, policy 403, 404, 407, and 408 directly align with restorative practices, tenets, student rights and responsibilities, student discipline, removal of students from a school area, suspension and expulsion. Obviously looking to lessen the use of that in a school environment. And also our regulations 400-04 and 08. And so I'm glad to see that you have already been looking at these policies and reviewing them. And so they are directly aligned with restorative practices. I mentioned earlier that we need a proactive approach when talking about restorative practices. And when I do the trainings, which I have trained over 200 staff since starting the position last year, we teach about how important it is to be proactive. And so while many may be familiar with restorative justice approaches being responsive, when we're training about restorative practices, we're looking at the proactive nature. We're looking at what's happening prior to a situation of conflict. How are we building that positive culture in advance? So this is the restorative practices continuum. And on this continuum, it is basically a window through which we are able to teach all people that are trained the importance of informal being like school-wide and formal practices being something that people are trained on, skilled to use, and major crisis situations. And so earlier there was a discussion or a comment, a public comment about an incident in a community. Those kind of things can be handled through formal conferences, groups, or circles where we allow all stakeholders to reflect and to problem solve, to identify what is needed for both parties and stakeholders who are equally important in our community to be able to coexist and to move forward. So that is in a nutshell what and why we have restorative practices. Let's take a quick break and I'm going to check in with you, but drop a comment, another modeling of what restorative practices looks like. It could look like in a classroom or a counseling group. What's the hardest thing about quarantine? Put it in the chat for me, please. I am so glad to see that you are still there because I could not see you the entire time I was presenting. And the comments are coming in. Uncertainty, having motivation at home without social interactions, being away from people. Thank you for sharing. Going back to our presentation, parenting and working. Yes, I can relate to that one. Definitely. No professional face-to-face, not being able to connect with friends physically. Yes. And so again, we've done 2 circle prompts so far that have allowed you to connect with others. I see some similar answers to those. And in any school environment, any organization, any team, you need to consistently build those connections with others so that you can build relationships. I am going to go back. I just love Google Meet. Shout out to all of our teachers. We can't thank you enough for managing these Google platforms because right now I have not done this in a while and it's so exciting. Trust me. Going back to the presentation.
Okay. Janine, are we supposed to be seeing your presentation? Okay, there we go.
All right. So these are a few articles. I won't click on each one of them, but the articles are from the International Institute of Restorative Practices. It gives you a lot of information about the content of the trainings that we offer. We did use some of our funds over the last 2 years to be able to purchase the resources to allow for professional training through the International Institute of Restorative Practices. I was transferred into the position to be able to be a licensed trainer and also to support a lot of the schools. And so we in the Department of Student Services under the leadership of Mr. Daner Falls, we have trained a lot of our team. Most of the 200 that were trained last year were in the Student Services Department. So we're talking about our counselors, our CAS workers, our PPWs, those who really have relationships that are strong with a lot of our students. We're looking to continue training. We've had a lot of leadership teams do some training. A lot of our school improvement plans include the use of equitable strategies like restorative practices. And so these articles give you a little bit more content-heavy information about why and what restorative practices looks like. So I'm not going to obviously read those. But why restorative practices in FCPS? Specifically, I'm going to go back to this slide. I would say these are my reasons, my whys for being so passionate and absolutely being thrilled about serving in this position is equity and inclusiveness. It is to negate the detrimental effects that come about by exclusionary practices. It is the use of trauma-informed approaches. I'm working alongside of Anne McGreevy and Rachel Eversole and some wonderful leaders in our county who are working with schools to ensure that we're using trauma-informed approaches. And so this is why restorative practices in FCPS. Relationships, I can't emphasize enough how important, one of my little signs here, relationships are. It says no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. And so this is one of the posters that I use when I do the training. And because my feeling is that you can't teach a child if they don't have a relationship with you. And so we're giving teachers who come from all different races and all different backgrounds, who are servicing and working with youth from all different backgrounds and all different races, those skills to be consistent with their approaches, be equitable with their practices, to ensure that they are strengthening their relationships. And finally, the culture of wellness and civility. And if you are thorough in your board or your strategies or your, the aspirational goals, you'll see that that language is also used in our aspirational goals. And so it only makes sense. But going back to another reason, because I am a scientist by nature, obviously we want to be cognizant of data. And so our county, we're looking at the disproportionate data. Specifically, I'm working with Dr. Chambers. We have several schools that have been identified for special education identification of African American students, specifically being labeled as emotionally disabled, and looking at the implementation of exclusionary discipline like suspension and expulsion. And again, seeing the high number of African American students, particularly those who are covered under IDEA, and the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And so the data is another reason why it's important for us to continue to use restorative practices as one of the strategies that we're using to support our students. So the short reason I want you to remember: keeping it real, relationships, equity, all and language is consistent. So I can't emphasize enough how important relationships are. Equity, we want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, that everyone feels like they belong in their school environment and that they can have a voice in the things that occur, the policies, the procedures, the things that are going on, the decisions being made. I know that we involve parents and our stakeholder in our school improvement teams. And so that's one way of being inclusive. We also have student members of the board, and we have students who are serving in leadership roles in their schools as well. And so all stakeholders. And a lot of times the strategies that we do in terms of the high crisis situations, when we're using those conferences and those restorative circles, we're involving all stakeholders who were impacted by an experience or a conflict. And then with the trainings, we are ensuring that we are using a consistent language. We ordered posters, we ordered cards that have the effective communication prompts, and I'll show you those in a second. So the 4 key tenets that are covered in the training through the International Institute of Restorative Practices is the social discipline window, effective statements in question, circles, and those are being those informal circles like you'll see in the elementary a lot of times with counselors or starting the morning meetings, and also with the more formal processes when we have a serious incident occur and maybe a student is suspended and is returning from a suspension. And so we're trying to build relationships with the different parties involved. And so those are more formal practices. And then the FAIR process really gets at what's going on through the lens of the school leadership team and how they involve all stakeholders beyond the people who were selected to be a part of the leadership team and their decision-making processes and their communication about expectations and engaging. The best example that I can give about the FAIR process would be when we had outer district requests or changes and how much our county communicated with all stakeholders by holding community chats or having signs across the county, making videos, those kind of things, and ensure that a community is involved with the changes in a population or community. So this is the social discipline window. The gist of this, without giving you an hour or 2 hour long explanation of what it is and why it's so important, the philosophy talks about that when you have a person in a position of authority, and to a student or to a child, that position of authority could be their teacher, that could be someone in the cafeteria. Regardless, most children see adults as authority figures. And so basically the understanding of this window is that people are more likely to make changes, positive changes in their behavior when those people that are in positions of authority do things with them. So for an example, a counselor, being in the cafeteria at lunch, having lunch with some students, an SRO being in the cafeteria, having lunch with students, and just getting to know them and building those relationships. I say that because I have this picture that I'm thinking of in my mind with my SRO from Ballinger sitting at lunch, you know, just having a really good time entertaining and talking with our students. And so I'm thinking about being in the warehouse the other day where one of our SROs in the community came by to get some clothing for a family who had a fire recently. And so I just, you know, I think about the social discipline window from the lens of children see adults as authority figures, regardless of their title, and they seek to please them, but they're going to require that relationship, that trust, that respect, the equity feeling from both ways. And so this window helps us to look at the various ways that children can see adults. Are you a person that's high control and low on support? Are you a person that's low on control and low on support? Are you a person that's high on control and very high on support, very restorative in nature? Now, there are obvious reasons why people can move from different lenses in this box. I know as a principal, I was not always restorative in nature. My first year as an AP, I probably wasn't so restorative in nature. And so what we do in these trainings is we reflect on our experiences and how we got to be where we are in our mindset. And we talk about when it's important to be restorative, how we can be restorative, how our community as a whole can make sure that we're all restorative in the same way. We want to refrain from being punitive where we're high in control and not providing any support, because all children are, you know, capable of succeeding as long as they're giving the right supports. And so effective communication, going back to the earlier picture with the, I'm going to go back to it so that you're familiar. The effective communication comes in with this particular picture. It's on the far left side, so it's an informal practice. But when I say it's informal, that's kind of giving the expectation that everybody should be able to do it with ease because it's not requiring so much of you. But it's something that is, you know, not always normal for everyone. So for example, a child walks in the building on a cold day with their hood on and their hat on and headphones. Now this is prior to quarantine, right? There's two ways a adult can respond to that situation. They could say, take off your hood, you know those expectations. Or they could say, I feel like you are still cold from coming outside. However, we have some rules here. Please rise to the occasion. And so those are two ways that you can accomplish the same result, but how you say, how you explain, how you relate, how you connect, the genuineness of your feelings, your facial expressions. These are some of the things that we talk about in our restorative training. We want to give clear feedback. We want to set those boundaries. You know, we're still in charge, high structure, high control, but we want to make sure that there is an understanding that we still care about you and we know that you're capable of meeting the expectations. And so we go over a lot of scenarios in our trainings about, you know, what that looks like, sounds like, feels like. How about when you were a child? How did it look like? Who was your most restorative adult in your childhood? In your household, are you a restorative person? And so we talk about this. And so those trainings are really, really good. And they really help people to reflect on the importance of being restorative. Then we have the cards that we ordered that have the restorative questions that are designed to elicit reflection about past, present, and future. And basically, we ask questions like, what happened? Rather than, why did you do that? What were you thinking at the time? Rather than, you must be crazy. Or what were you thinking? Like, that's full. These are certain statements that you will see or have seen on referrals. And so I want you to understand that the use of something like this on a question card is necessary in a lot of places to ensure that the child receives it. Because as a teacher, there have been times in the past where I probably could have made a sarcastic statement to comment to a student that may have been received well if the relationship was good. However, when we do that and we have no relationship, you can only imagine the impact. And so we talk about those types of incidents. Why are you restorative? Who can you be more restorative with? Who can you be less restorative with? And why it's important to kind of be consistent with your approach to managing interactions consistently all the time. And so earlier today, I asked what the hardest thing about quarantine was. Obviously, that is something that is more of a high-risk question. A counselor might not ask it in a group where they are knowledgeable about some of the things going on in the child's life, right? You may choose not to have everyone respond. You may choose to have some people respond. And so restorative questions allow reflection. They allow assessment. They prevent you from exclusion, and they allow you to really engage and understand with your community. So, thinking about being restorative, thinking about the social discipline window, I like to pause for a second and have you drop a comment that tells me who you may need to be more restorative with or have a restorative chat with soon. If you don't want to answer that question, I invite you to answer the question, are you more restorative at work or at home? Work. Me too. Work. A lot of work answers. Okay, I see someone saying an opportunity to be more restorative with their son. Yes. Me and my daughter and I as well. My 18-year-old daughter living in the same house because college is not happening right now. Everyone's at home. I know you can relate, mothers, fathers. Work needs to be better at home. Yes, absolutely. And at home is where you can practice being more restorative so that you're able to model that at work as well for others who might not be as restorative as you are at work. Going back to our presentation, thank you for being an interactive group. I really appreciate you. Where can we find restorative practices in FCPS? Well, just about everywhere, right? The framework for teacher under our organizational development, Meg Lee is doing a phenomenal job leading her team on the Charlotte Danielson's framework for teaching and all kinds of other brain research, the power of yet. That's very restorative in nature. Those motivational, the focus on domain 2 and looking at instruction. And so the framework for teaching is one of our professional learning goals for our county. And so it's there. Restorative practices can be found with our social emotional development. Anne McGreevy has done a lot with bringing paths to our elementary schools. A lot of our elementary schools are using it from K to 2, and some have used extra funding to have K to 5 participating in paths. The guidance and counseling lessons are the mindfulness. If you have a school that's implementing mindfulness, that's all restorative practices in action. Anything that's promoting reflection, anything that's promoting community building is restorative practices. There was another slide, or perhaps missed it. Okay, there's a duplicate there was another slide. So I'll just go ahead and shout out Dr. Harris with the Equity Office. There is a lot going on with the requirement of schools to implement lessons through their professional learning days in our schools that talk about equity and excellence, and so that's been going on for quite some time in our school. A lot of our schools have equity reps, and Dr. Harris can speak to that. But Dr. Chambers is also doing a lot with the special education department, focusing on several schools and buying resources to ensure that we are responding to the disproportionate data that we have in some of our schools related to the data that I spoke about earlier. And so the impact of all that is going to be and continues to be increased connections of all of our stakeholders in our communities, improved sense of belonging and social responsibility for all stakeholders to be a part of solutions, to promote trauma-informed responses and supports to be available, to promote physically and emotionally safe school environments for students and families. And so I'll end, I believe, with this video that is from our district. And you cannot. And I end with that video because I feel that that best represents the why restorative practices. It speaks to the need that we're changing, we're evolving consistently, continuously, and we have to work together, one community together strong. And that's what happens when you implement restorative practices in a community. You get the feel of the entire community working together to accomplish goals. And so there is another video attached to the very beginning that gives a quick IIRP version of what restorative practices is. And so I am going to entertain questions. And then after that, we can see that last video about IIRP. Any questions about where we are? I think there was another slide that spoke to kind of where we are right now with restorative practices. And I'll summarize it before entertaining questions, because I want to see if I can prevent some of the questions that you might ask. But we are currently looking at continuing our training. And so I shared that I'm in the central office to be able to train schools, leadership teams, individuals, whoever needs the training. I'm working specifically with some other schools who have been identified with disproportionate numbers related to the data I shared earlier. We have a restorative practices work group, which includes Dawn, who's here on this committee as well, and some other teachers and counselors and leadership members at different buildings in our county. Spingman is on our committee as well. We're going to be starting those back up in the spring semester for this year. Due to quarantine, we have taken a break and letting schools really adjust to all the things that they're doing with the virtual option. Again, I want to thank all of our teachers and administrators and counselors for their work with that. We are implementing restorative practices, not just on elementary, but middle and high school. We've had a lot of our administrators come to training. A lot of counselors have come to training. We have ongoing professional development opportunities. I've done book studies in the evening with these two books. There is also alternatives to suspension. I've facilitated some conferences after a conflict, a serious incident, There was one where there were two families that neither one of them wanted their children to coexist. And so in collaboration with that school principal and the head of student services and myself facilitating a dialogue after the conference, the families were both exchanging phone numbers and really understanding where each of them were coming from and the experiences that had led them to be not so restorative, but more restorative after that experience. And so I'm hopeful that we will continue to roll out the training. My position has been funded for another year, so I'll be here again next year doing the same work, continuing to increase the number of people trained. We are training our SROs coming up in the fall. I know that they're going to get this training from the equity office. They're also going to get the training from our restorative practices team. And so I'm excited about that. And so that's all I wanted to also mention, as well as provide my contact information. So now I am officially done. Are there any questions? I'm going to use my teacher wait time and wait a few more minutes. All right, so then I'm going to put you on the spot. Oh, you have a question?
Okay. I do.
Yeah.
After students have been through a restorative circle, do you notice improvements in their grades? Is there any data to show that it helps them refocus on school?
We have not collected that kind of data, but I have seen articles. I'm looking at restorative practices with my research that associate or link academic achievement and gains with restorative practices. And so I know that I'm looking to look at climate, but I know that we are looking at what types of data points we can measure with schools that are implementing restorative practices as well.
And I can just kind of interject there to say that we are going to be administering a social emotional learning survey that will be given to all students in grades 3 to 12, as well as staff. And that's part of how we're going to be measuring the board's aspirational goal number 5. And that will give us some data that will inform how our restorative practices, as well as paths. And at middle school level and high school level, they've been using School Connect, which is a similar program to what PASS is for the secondary. So that will give us some information that will help to inform about student perceptions and to see the impact that it's having on our students, and will help us to inform practices moving forward.
Jen, can you say what PATHs stand for?
I bet you Dr. Harris can.
Yes, promoting alternative thinking strategies.
I knew you could, Dr. Harris. Thank you.
Teamwork. Thank you both.
Yes, and Dr. Harris, do you want to speak to anything connected to the equity? Because I know Anne McGreevy and your team is doing also a lot with respect to things that could fall under the restorative practices title as well.
Yeah, no, the important thing to know, as you reiterated, Ms. Beck, is that all of the work that we do is interconnected. And so that's the positive thing. The work that's done in student services is connected to the work that's done in accelerated achievement and equity, is connected to the work that's done in our school administration team. And so that's some of the benefits and the results of restorative practices. And while you cannot isolate any one thing that says is the contributing factor that leads to positive change and improvements in students, because of the work of all of us collectively, we're hoping that that's the end result. And as Ms. Bingman reiterated, that survey certainly will give us some data to let us know whether or not all of our collective efforts are benefiting our students.
And just a commentary, when I was principal and we utilized restorative practices, I did really see the impact of students when they had that opportunity to really have their voice and to really express themselves, and then to hear the voice of other students. They really were able to come to a common understanding. One time there was a group of girls that had had some conflict, and it had gone on, and they were so frustrated with one another. And so they were, it just continued. So we had this conference, and they all told their story. And in the end, one student said, look, we've all got our own issues. Why are we making more issues for one another? Like, let's just work together. Like, you have an issue, you have an issue, you have an issue, I have an issue. Like, they began to really understand one another. So it's really, with restorative practices, it provides that opportunity for student voice that helps them to understand one another, and then helps them to be able to make a difference moving forward. So I saw great benefit when students were given that opportunity to have a voice. And I'm a huge believer in restorative practices and allowing students to be able to talk about issues honestly and openly, so that they're able to feel heard, and then be able to apply that in the future.
Absolutely. In the future, being adults, right? When you become an adult, you cannot resolve a conflict the way that you might have seen it done unsuccessfully in the school and get a punitive consequence. And so we're teaching them to be problem solvers, to be thinkers, to be able to resolve conflict in a way that's going to help them to be a successful adult.
Ms. Beck, can you share the impact of restorative justice and the use of restorative justice practices on our Black and Brown students within FCPS?
Awesome question. I can relate just from being an African American. I also have read a lot of research about the schools who are seeking to be more inclusive and the impact of that. But specifically, I think that, everyone, not just African American, enjoy and appreciate trust. They enjoy having a relationship and connecting with others. But I use the phrase in my presentation, real, keeping it real. I think that's really, really important for many of our students, including our students of color. A lot of times what we're seeing is when we're having those conversations, they're feeling isolated. They're feeling that they can't trust people. And their feelings are valid and important. And so, like Ms. Bingman mentioned earlier, how important it is to validate and allow them to have that voice. A lot of our school leaders are taking those times to pull in students, as leadership team members, and to have dialogues about what's going on, because our students are the best ones to really give us a pulse of what's going on in our building. And I would agree with Ms. Bingman that when I was doing that and offering those opportunities for just communication, it definitely was something that sometimes they were coming to me and saying, can we have a restorative circle? And so I think that it is definitely making an impact on all students, but for our minorities, it's definitely very helpful. I'll speak to the March on Justice that was held in Frederick some time ago, where there was almost 5,000 people in the city of Frederick who came out to support Black Lives Matters, and how that was a restorative event, seeing people of all races, all ethnicities, all kinds of beliefs and backgrounds support one cause. And that's the power of allowing children to stand up, because from my understanding, that was something that was led by our youth, right? And so when you give students a voice, they're capable of so much.
Can you share, Ms. Beck, how is data being collected? I know you had mentioned the expulsion rates and the over-identification of students with special needs. How exactly is FCPS going about collecting the data on the impact of restorative practices?
So specifically, we're looking at this subgroup that is specifically the one that we're monitoring, right? So Dr. Chambers and I are working closely together to ensure that as we implement restorative practices in the targeted schools, we're documenting the use of whatever strategies, the training, the supports, and then we're going to follow up at the end of the year. There's an action plan. I would suggest that maybe you invite her to one of these meetings so she can give you more details. I don't want to speak on her behalf, but there's an entire action plan associated with responding to the disproportionate data as it relates to special education and African American students.
And we always have all of our data for all of our schools. We're able to disaggregate it based on student groups, based on schools. And so everybody has the ability to progress monitor their data. And so one of the things that we can do is we can look at each school that has been utilizing restorative practices, and we can pull whatever data points that we want to look at, whether it be attendance, whether it be grades, whether it be assessment scores, whether it be discipline. We can pull all of that data to be able to look at the progress. And so unfortunately, based on last year and COVID and the fact that we weren't in the building, our data has a bit of a gap. And so at this time, we're not necessarily able to do as much as we typically would, as Ms. Beck would be doing, is looking at those schools who have been implementing it and really looking at their data points due to the impact of our attendance and discipline with regard to COVID. So I think the survey will be a huge help for us in these times whenever our attendance and our discipline data is a bit different, and can help us to inform the impact that it's happening.
And Ms. Bingham also has a committee where we're looking at disciplinary referrals and the titles and the strategies that are being used by schools, that restorative practices strategies being one of them, that we're looking at tweaking to change to be able to monitor that. So to answer your question, or to dissect it a little bit more, looking at those specific things that were on a continuum, like the use of effective communication, or a circle, or a conference, or something as an alternative to suspension, being options for the reporting out of data maybe inside of our county. I know that there's specific policy that you have to follow for the state of Maryland, but looking at that within our county to see specifically what strategies are being used is something that we're also looking at doing. So if you could in the chat drop why restorative practices, based on the work that this committee has already done, I would be curious as to your takeaway from the presentation and why you feel that it should or should not be implemented, or any other questions that you may have about restorative practices in the chat, so that I can share those out. Why restorative practices from your lens? And everyone on the committee, I haven't met everyone and I don't know all of your positions, but it looks pretty diversified in terms of positions here, because I don't know everyone's faces. I know our central office people. So I'll be curious to think from your lens, from where you sit and why you were a part of this committee, why restorative practices?
Are there any more questions or discussions for Ms. Beck? Well, Ms. Beck, we really appreciate you taking the time this evening to talk to us. I think it was very informative. I'm sure as we move forward, we'll probably have more questions for you, but we appreciate your hard work, and thank you for giving your information tonight.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the work that's being done by this team. It's very important work, so thank you for all that you're doing.
One question: Can you forward your presentation to Ms. Lynch so we can put that in our minutes?
I sure will, and I'm gonna make that edit because I know I had a slide with Dr. Harrison and Dr. Chambers' name on it, so I'm gonna fix that first, and then I'm gonna send it. Thank you.
Okay.
So much.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. All right. Okay. All right. I think next on our agenda will be board member comments, and we'll have comments, I guess, from Mr. Mason, and then we'll introduce our newest board member, who is going to be a member of our Racial Equity Committee, Mr. David Bass. So, Mr. Mason, we'll let you go first, and then we'll go into Mr. Bass.
I think Janine might be gone, but I just wanted to say thank you, and her work is so valuable for our school system, along with Ms. Bingman and Dr. Harris and our department there for AAE. Forget what it stands for, sorry. But it's so valuable for for the success of our students, and understanding what they go through in a day and how we can help them be successful. And I appreciate all the work that is being done for our special needs students, and the work that's going to be done to help understand why so many of our Black and brown students are labeled as special ed, and see what we can do to help them be successful also. And I will keep them brief and end with have a happy holiday, everyone, and I hope everybody stays safe and keep your parties under 10.
Thank you, Mr. Mason. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our newest board member, and also the new board representative for to our board, to our committee, Mr. David Bass. Mr. Bass.
Thank you, Marv. I should say I think my internet might be a little spotty, and I see myself. I don't see the other videos. Hopefully, you guys can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just yeah, I'm very excited to serve on this committee. You know, many of the goals of this committee I just think are essential for us as we move our school system forward. I think particularly about you know, addressing issues of racism and microaggressions directly, and really ensuring that our staff and our curriculum reflect the diversity of our student body and the diversity of our county. And so I'm very excited to serve on this committee, and yeah, I look forward to meeting you all, hopefully very shortly in person. So hope everyone has a very, very happy holiday season.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Appreciate it. Elissa, you want to scroll down one more there? Okay. We're going to now we're going to talk a little bit about some policy additions and revisions that we received. One more slide, Elissa. And then there was three that came before us, and some of the committees wanted to discuss. The first one was Regulation 300-1, recruitment, selection, and employment of teacher personnel. And then two of them that were kind of closely related. Policy 516, teaching of controversial subjects. And of course, related to that was Regulation 500-40, the teaching of controversial regulations. So we'll actually go to that first one. And who was going to do that presentation? Ms. Andre?
Hey, Marv, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the subcommittees because it's actually within the subcommittee's report.
Okay, all right. We'll do that then. We'll go ahead and go to the subcommittees then. Thank you, Elissa. So let's go ahead and scroll down a couple more then. Okay, so we'll go to the bylaws subcommittee, and whoever's going to present that, please go ahead.
That's going to be Sharice Diggins. Sharice.
Hi, I was trying to find my mute button. Okay, so I'll go ahead and review the bylaws subcommittee work. Read this out. Focus on and revision of bylaw Article 2, membership section 2. Amend and or added language includes a maximum of 3 high school student voting members from different high schools, a representation from each of the high school feeder areas when possible. Each student member will serve a base term of 1 year. At the conclusion of the base term, the BOE may offer the member the option to extend their term for another 2-year period for non-student members and another 1-year period for student members. Change active member to active voting member for all members with the exception of the 3 non-voting members of FCPS senior leadership who are nominated by the superintendent to serve in an advisory capacity to the committee.
Okay.
I'd just like to offer an apology to Sharice. I apologize, Sharice. I had you read the wrong thing.
It's okay. I was going to read this one and the next one. So
great.
I was going to just roll with it.
Yes.
Okay.
So I know we worked together with Mr. Baughman on this, and I wasn't sure if, Daryl, you wanted to add anything. But this was the work that centered around including more student member voices on the Racial Equity Committee.
Yes, I just want to add that we had a student to come in and give a presentation, or a student group to come in and give a presentation. And the information shared was so valuable because it comes directly from the students that the system is serving, and to hear their perspective was so important. And so we wanted to expand our group so that we could have more of those opportunities to hear the voice of the students as we cover these important issues that impact their education. So I was glad to have the people serving on the committee to help to come up with some solutions to add them to our group. And the 1 year is because for the most part, they may be a junior or a senior. If they're a senior, then it's going to be 1 year. If they're a junior and they want to continue, then they can be extended for another year. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baughman, Ms. Diggins. I think at this point in time, maybe we need a motion to bring these recommendations forward to the board. Is that proper at this particular time? Because I think the board actually established the membership, and we would have to go back to the board to modify the membership. So
yes.
So I would need a motion to make a recommendation to the board for extending offers for 3 high school students.
I'd like to make a motion to revise and amend our bylaws.
Okay, thank you. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Okay, thank you.
Who the second? I'm sorry.
It was me, Ivania.
Yeah, okay, all right. Does everybody understand about the raise hand function? If you do, please raise your hand if you're in agreement with the recommendation from the bylaw subcommittee on this for adding 2 more high school students. And we'll leave your hands up for about 30 or 40 seconds there, so Ms. Lynch can verify we've got a majority or a declination.
And we do.
Okay, so that particular motion will go forward, and we'll go forward with that one and make some recommendations on that one. Thank you. All right, if everybody will please lower your hand, and let's see here. We'll go to the next slide, please. I think that's another one for, nope. Isn't there another one for the bylaws? Is that the only one?
That's the only one that I know of for the bylaws.
Okay, so we'll go to the Early Childhood, Elementary, Middle, and High School Data Subcommittee then. And their report, please.
And Sharice, if you could be so kind to present.
Absolutely. Let's see. Thank you. So our summary of work and discussions: the school policy is governed by the Board of Education. School regulation falls under the purview of the school superintendent. The Racial Equity Committee would bring proposed revisions for the policy to the School Board of Education. The RAC Board Liaison would bring policy recommendations or new policy initiatives to the board to be included on the board agenda. The Board of Education determines by vote if they want to develop any new policies. Discussion to have the Racial Equity Committee review policy 444 as it is the FCPS equity policy and guides the work of the Racial Equity Committee. Next slide. Thank you. So these are the proposed revisions on these three policies. Policy 102 is under meetings. And in this policy here, we added a bullet point, which is bullet point E, and we added the highlighted version to provide equitable access to our community by ensuring that all meetings have an interpreter to translate the meetings for maximum engagement of our community. The next policy, policy 405. In this policy, we added a few words there. You see the word bolded, the all, and each and every student. In this policy, we wanted to make sure that we emphasize that we want to include every student. For policy 430, attendance at schools, this policy here, we wanted to make sure that we clarify and to encourage more on this statement. And so this one, if you have any questions, please defer to Dr. Harris. We've spent a lot of time on this one, but it was very important that we get this one down, especially when it comes to students and the age of the student. Next slide. Our subcommittee next steps. Closely monitor all students, pre-K through 12, to review student groups, race, ethnicity, language, gender, and citizenship status, as well as gifted and talented students with disabilities, English learners, for disproportionality regarding identification and academic data. At this time, if anyone has any questions, I would say go ahead and ask them, but I'm still going to defer them to Ms. Bingham and Dr. Harris.
Are any questions?
Can we go back to the previous slide? That last sentence, previous. Yes, limited formal or interrupted education. Oh, that's not the slide I was talking about.
Okay.
It was another highlighted slide.
We just have one for our subcommittee, and this is the one with the highlights.
Okay.
Well, we're going to have by Robert's Rule of Order, I think we need to have 3 different votes on this. We'll have to go by each policy and have a vote on each policy. So for the modifications to policy 102, which adds section E, I would need a motion and a second, and then we'll do a vote on that one.
Oh, I see what I was looking at. It's the first sentence on the third paragraph. Students under 21 years of age prior to the first day of school of that year may be legally and encouraged to enroll for the current school year. It just, it doesn't read well.
Can I speak on that just for a little bit? I think the goal of this was to try to, because we know that the aging out has been an issue in the past, we wanted, and we couldn't find the right word to say it, right? So this is just definitely a recommendation, and we would appreciate the board's feedback, but the goal of it is to really try to send the message to the schools and the superintendent in some way to say that while we understand the aging out is a concern, while as long as they are under that age, especially like our immigrant populations, we want to be sure that they are welcome and able to enroll in school and not being discouraged, even if it's only on paper. Like, we know that there's been experiences that feels like it's been discouraged or talked out of enrolling. So some way to incorporate that so that doesn't happen and becomes more equitable for students is what we want to include into this policy, if that makes any sense.
Could it, Ivania, could it then say students under 21 years of age prior to the first day of school may be encouraged and may legally enroll for the current school year? Just,
I like that better.
Just revise where encouraged is.
Yeah.
I think, we're not, if that's what the committee is okay with, the wording of it, I think the message is what we were mainly most advocating.
trying to get it there. Yeah.
So this is Jackie. I just have a follow-up question about, because I don't know enough of this policy. So legally, students who are up to the age of 21 can enroll in schools, correct?
Correct.
So
Correct.
I don't know. I guess I'm wondering if the language to encourage should be put into a policy statement, or because I don't know what legal weight that has. Because if students legally already can do that, how does this change the policy by adding encourage to the policy? Because then I would think we need to encourage a lot of things. So I'm just thinking, you know, how does it really? And then what's
Jackie,
encouraged, right? It's up to interpretation about how you encourage someone to go into school, to enroll into school. So I'm thinking this might need to be maybe a nuanced conversation, but I think there needs to be maybe more teeth to the policy than other than just encouraging, right? Should there be outreach to certain communities, education, as opposed to just encourage? So there's actually more an action about what encouragement means.
So Jackie, that's a good comment. And when our subcommittee was struggling with the language, I'll summarize what the discussion was. And so right now in the policy statement, it says that students under 21 years of age prior to the first day of school of that year may be legally enrolled for the current school year. And so between the years, let's say of 18 to 21, students do not have to come to the public school setting and system. They can, but they don't have to. And oftentimes students choose not to. And when we talk about those who are newcomers, those who are just coming into the country, oftentimes students who come at older age ranges between 17 and 21, they oftentimes comes with limited education or limited formal education in a school setting from the country that they're in. And they usually have a lot of experience either working already or fending for themselves. And so the language translation here is to say, you know what? Yes, you can legally enroll in school, but you have the choice not to. So the conversation was, let's encourage students to enroll in school so that we can help them with a pathway to further education, a bridge from the public school system to the community college, so that they can not only learn the language, learn basic academic skills, but then also learn trade or skills as well, so that they can grow to be independent citizens in society. So that was the whole conversation around that language that we were struggling with. How do we put it in there, and brought it here to the committee? We know they can be legally enrolled in schools, but we want them to be in school. And so how can we encourage that?
And if I can just also add a point on that, it's also how do we emphasize to the schools, because the other issue that we discussed, and we'll talk about that in the next subcommittee group too, but another issue that we came into is we're able as a committee to make recommendations on policy revisions, not on regulations. So it's up to the superintendent to change regulations. So the goal of us changing the wording in the policy is so that the superintendent will then turn around and make edits to her regulations to kind of keep that momentum going. I think the problem that we've been seeing, at least within my community, is there is a lot of interpretation on what that legally means and what we can offer the students, especially if they are coming between the ages of 17 to 21. They may be encouraged, or they may be presented with other options and not necessarily heavily encouraged to stay in school. which is where they should be, because that's where the immersion of the language comes in. There's so many benefits that come out of that. So just kind of emphasizing it to the schools that the board has the expectation that not only is it legal for them to be in the school, but as a school system, we want them there.
So this is Jackie. I think, I mean, that's good clarification. But again, I think that's a different policy statement or a different action for me. Like, I think because overall, then I think this, to me, it sounds like the school system, there's a suggestion for the school system to look into how it retains students, especially students of color or students who have these older students, which is different than just the attendance of the school and enrollment in the school. So those are just some of my comments. But thank you for the clarification.
Mark added the word assisted in the chat. Maybe that year, maybe encouraged, assisted to legally enroll for the current school year.
So what if we made it something like that student would be counseled on the benefits of, enrolling into the school system and assisted with the process, something like that?
So I think that's even better. But again, so maybe I just need to understand the process, right? Because right now, to me, this policy just says that, you know what, you have a legal right to go to school. But then what I'm also hearing and my understanding is that there are a subset of older students, perhaps these 18 to 20 students that are 18 to 21, that are not enrolling in school. But do they even know about it? Do they even know about, like, is there outreach to say that, you can legally go to school and these are the benefits of going to school? So I guess that for me, it's kind of like this policy says you can legally go to school, but then how do you even outreach to those? Is this presuming that there's students who are 18 coming to the school, coming to the school for help, and there's not help being provided by the school system? They'll just tell them, oh, you can go to school, and just give them a pamphlet. And
so one of the one of the things that Avanya was saying earlier relative to policy versus regulation, and so some of the specifics about the how and the actual proactive steps towards this general language comes within the superintendent's regulation as she directs staff towards this end. And the discussion that was held in the subcommittee was, this is a board committee, and the board controls the policy, and based upon any changes in school system policy, then the superintendent then revises regulation to put in specific action steps to direct staff on how to go about implementing this. Nonetheless, it does sound like that the wording is awkward and there needs to be some cleanup of the wording with this one. And so I don't know how you want to handle that, whether or not you want to think about, Marvin, the premise behind this addition to the policy and allowing staff to work with the board on some of the language nuances, because, and certainly Mr. Mason, please jump in here regarding that, but this can go to policy committee several times to nuance the specific language in the wording.
Mm-hmm. Ivania made a good point there. I think probably maybe this particular specific policy, maybe the subcommittee could go back and talk about it and bring it back to our next meeting after having some discussions with some of our board representatives that are on this committee, on the committee of the whole, and try to get some language, get the language squared away there. I understand what they're trying to say is, and I agree that, yeah, what we're having here now is a little, is not what we really want to say, and we want to do it so that the board, as part of their direction to the superintendent as she does her regulations, is to make sure that we're all inclusive, that we're making sure folks understand that there's not going to be any barriers to anyone under 21 that wants to come to and get an education. And I think we need to figure out how to put the proper language in the policy so that the superintendent can actually put something in fruition that'll make that happen.
You can always send your premise to the policy committee and let them work it out if you want. I think that's what Dr. Harris is alluding to. Or you can take it back to the subcommittee and reword it, and then send it to the board policy committee.
Mm-hmm.
I feel as though the intent behind the change is, I now have unpacked it, and thank you for helping me do that, and I understand the intent behind the change. Mm-hmm. I just think the subcommittee should go back and make sure that the intent matches the impact of what it says, with like changing that wording around a little bit.
And what you suggested, is that what you've typed in blue there, Elisa?
I was trying to script as others were making suggestions. So if anyone else has anything that you'd like me to take note of so that the subcommittee can see it after this meeting, just go ahead and unmute, and I'll script the notes right now so that we can hold on to it for the subcommittee.
I think most of the subcommittee members are on the call tonight. And so I think we have a good sense of what the full committee is saying, and certainly can take this and go back and massage it a little bit more and come back at the next meeting with some cleaned up language.
Okay, thank you. Is that a consensus for the group? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. Do we want to vote on the other two recommendations for policy modifications? Policy 102 and policy 405. Do we want to go ahead and move those forward for the vote?
I have a clarifying question on policy 102. In regards to saying that ensuring that all meetings have an interpreter, we might want to add the word needed interpreter or requested interpreter, because that's a very broad statement. I don't know if that means a sign language interpreter, a Spanish interpreter. Yeah, it could be. I think we should look at narrowing that down a little bit.
What's the language that you would put in, Sabrina? Because Elisa, since you're able to revise, can we put that language in just to see it and see how it looks? Sabrina, can you say that one more time, that revision?
By ensuring that all meetings have a interpreter when needed. I guess when requested, because they would have to, if we're going to be able to do that, it would have to be a request for a specific type of interpreter for what someone is asking for, so that we can meet that need.
And so, Sabrina, that's current practice. Anytime there's a request for sign language or Spanish interpreting, that request is made or fulfilled.
I think this was also speaking to committee meetings, if I'm understanding what the purpose of this is for.
Mm-hmm. It was.
Is there any other discussion
I hate
on?
to bring this up, but if you're
go ahead,
talking
Daryl.
interpreters, because in some cases, and actually we're looking to add this capability, and in the near future, the interpreting services may not necessarily be done by an interpreter. So I would just say interpretation services, because it could be an individual or it could be a solution, but either way.
Is there some sense you need to have, like, if available, like there are over 6,000 spoken languages in the world. I'm sure you're not going to be able to provide an interpreter for every one of them. So is there some way to kind of put barriers on this of what the expectation is for the school system?
That's a good one, Mark. Wow.
I support the concept here, and I think it's absolutely needed. But there's always going to be that fringe case, and I would like to make sure that we're not setting the school system up to have to deal with that fringe case of.
I speak for myself in knowing that if that one language was the language spoken in my home and I were asking the public school to make the meeting accessible to me, that because it's free in public education, I would want that to be done so. Just as for IEP meetings, parents are provided, not even upon request, but we are required in IEP meetings by federal law to go ahead and provide those interpretation services. It is up to the parent to decline them, but it must be offered, even if it is in a language that is not most commonly spoken in the county. Whether the county goes ahead and does this through Language Line, which offers a huge amount of languages. I believe if that one student were my own, I would still want that access.
So is the general policy, because I'm not familiar with policy 102, like when we're talking about meetings, we're just talking about any kind of meet, like, I guess, what are the parameters around? Because it seems like for some meetings that's already established in the case. Are we talking about like more community meetings, or what are we talking about when we're adding to this regulation?
I think it was specifically, we were talking about having interpretation services for our racial equity committee, but in looking at it, we were thinking about, other committees would have to have the same thing.
And I think for me, I think it's just a matter of trying to make all of FCPS systems and like more participatory for the community. And how do we make that happen? I feel like the engagement maybe with a lot of the meetings, even the Board of Education meetings or even this meeting, aren't happening because it's not something that, again, it's being publicly known that FCPS is committed to maybe providing. So I think that by providing it or putting it into a policy again, I keep going back to the end FCPS racism and that the student group that's being led, people are kind of looking at us as a committee to kind of make impact and change and kind of take a stand towards equity. And I think while I understand the concerns because there's logistical concerns, there's fiscal concerns, there's a lot of different concerns, which I totally understand. But again, these are recommendations that we would like to make to the board, and the board would then hash them out. I just think that we want to continue making these bold stands for equity and language, and being able to provide that to the community is just one way of showing that that's what we're trying to do.
And just to clarify that the purpose of Policy 102, I'm reading it from the policy right now, says the Board of Education values the importance of keeping the public apprised of its regular meetings, providing the opportunity for input, and ensuring compliance with the provisions of the Open Meetings Act. So it's primarily focused on, I think, more of the committee meetings and the anything to deal with the Open Meetings Act is what the purpose of that Policy 102 is about.
Mm-hmm. But I also encourage you, if you really want to get something approved, it has to be doable. It has to be reasonable. And again, I understand what the intent is, but maybe if we put more reasonable parameters around it, such as in response to a certain percentage of the population. Because again, if you look at Frederick High School, the number of languages spoken in that one high school, if you were to ask the school system to provide an interpreter for every language spoken in that high school or board meeting, it's not even doable. And so we want to try to make it something that the board can look at and say, yeah, I don't see why we can't do that. It's doable. It makes sense. And so that's just a recommendation that, you know, it's one thing to say we want something, but let's try to put some parameters around it to make it easier to get it approved, as opposed to making it more difficult to get it approved.
So I have a suggestion then why don't we could we start with something like, you know, based on data, based on yearly county data, or maybe census data or something of the top 5 languages provided in the county, or give it some type of a data angle and back it up to where the need is. And then I would still like to include some sort of what Elisa was saying is kind of like, can we provide and ensure that we're still going to be able to provide? So if there is that one-off case of a language that nobody really speaks, we have some type of a service or a system that they can call in, they can get a transcript later, but we're not just saying that we can't do it either. Like I would at least maybe say that we're providing these languages as a staple, and then the rest can be as requested in a given time frame in written, and you know, I don't know, something like that. But I don't know, I feel very strong about this because again, just within my community, this has been such a barrier. It's just such a barrier for so many families, and so I am just a strong advocate for this, and I will probably fight tooth and nail for this. So I don't know what the wording looks like. I'm happy to help with suggestions, but that's kind of where I stand with this.
And I understand. I'm just trying to give you a recommendation so that you have a better chance of getting something approved.
Yeah, but so Daryl, this is Jackie, and I agree with Ivania because I'm just thinking like urban is probably not the top 5 in Frederick County, right? But it's a common enough language spoken that you can find an interpreter for, even if it's a phone interpreter. And in some instances, I would push against the system a little bit and say, why are we not able to do the interpretation? Like, what do we need to make changes to our system to allow the interpretation to be provided, right? So now it's kind of like blaming the victim because you just don't happen to speak the top 5 languages. It's going to be easier for the school system. But, you know, if you really want to have equitable, I agree. We've got to push back a little bit. There are more than 200 languages that most language lines allow interpretation for. I think we have to find a way to make that accessible. Like I did a talk recently with the Portland school system about racism, and it was an online webinar. They had the Zoom meeting set up with interpreters who spoke Portuguese, that spoke Spanish, that spoke multiple languages, to allow participants to access that webinar. So other school systems can do it. We need to find a way to do it.
Yeah, a webinar is different than a meeting.
No,
You
I
know,
agree. I agree, but
and
but
and
it's
I
not, no, but it's not impossible.
well, let me tell you, I have been researching to find a solution that will allow the language interpreters on our platform. And I had a solution. I had a company that was the top company for developing these type solutions. And we almost bought that solution. But then that company themselves said, you know what? It's not working the way we were expecting it to work. And it's not going to sell because the price is astronomical. We need to go back to the drawing board. We were going after this with other school systems. The capability is just not there right now. They're working on it, they're building it, but it's just not there right now. That's why I said for the time being, if we can come up with something that's a little more reasonable and obtainable, then it just makes it easier to get the yes. But if you put something in there that is unachievable, you're just going to get a no, and it's going to be frustrating. So if we're working towards the yes, let's come up with something that makes it, easier to say yes to. I mean, if you're looking at a percentage of the population that exceeds 3% or 5% or something like that, some type of parameter that would make, sense from a lot of different perspectives. It's not that we don't want to provide this service, it's just not there right now.
So currently, we have the language line that is available in every school. And for any and every language, if a family needs translating services, we can provide it through the language line.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, the thought was made about the requirements for students with disabilities in translating. And so the law says that if your population within the school system is 1% or above of that student population, then you are required to provide document translations and things like that. However, it also is the case that if a parent requests translating services at those meetings, we look for it and work to provide those as well. We just had one not too long ago, and it was a language that is rarely spoken, but we worked and found someone in the community to be able to support us with that. And so it's not that it's not being done. When we talk about I'm wondering about the all meetings, and I'm appreciative of the conversation about when we talk about all meetings, what are we talking about? And so there's some language that's been put in here about all open meetings, or those meetings that are within the open acts, or some suggestions to say if a language spoken within the school system is at 3 or 5%. So putting some parameters around those, that does not mean that we will not strive to provide interpreting services whenever requested, because we do. Nonetheless, from this policy statement, that's where I hear trying to get some sort of parameters around exactly what do we mean, because there are a lot of meetings that's hosted through the school system and through the board. And so what type of guidance? And if you truly mean all, then it's all and it's everything. But and the board will have to deal with that as they receive this proposed language.
May I suggest that the subcommittee goes back and does some better work and presents something at the next meeting? This can drag on for the rest of the night. Yeah, we do have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. I hate to so we're only 10 minutes away from our hard stop. So now if somebody else wants to lead the meeting, but I have to have a hard stop, I apologize, but I have a hard stop at 8 o'clock. So, but this is going to go on very well. And this is good discussion. I've heard excellent points on both sides. But this is what we're here for, is to try to figure out how to make things right. So I agree with Reverend Simmons. Maybe the committee should come back and look at these and just kind of tighten these up a little bit, and we can look at these the next time.
Sarah's been patiently waiting. Can we let her speak on it?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Sarah. I apologize. I saw Sarah there, and I thought she had spoken. Go ahead, Sarah.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Going from one Zoom to the next. The one thing I would just offer, because we've done this a lot, we are a federally funded technical assistance provider, so we do a lot of in-person meetings and webinar meetings. What usually becomes a sticking point about what's reasonable for us is the time frame in which the request is received. So I think we've never been, if we have a certain time frame, we expect ourselves to be able to meet whatever request is held to us. So I think that's where I'm making some of the differentiation and what's reasonable and what's not. We can't expect someone to come like 1 hour before a meeting and make the request. I don't know what the regulations are around this, but I do think if we are given enough time, the feasibility issues tend to go away. If we have a month, like 2 weeks in advance to kind of figure out how to resolve some of these issues. So I just put that out there, and I'm happy to connect with the subcommittee to share what we've been doing as with our federal work to try to alleviate these challenges, because accessibility is absolutely fundamental.
Okay, so the consensus, thank you, Sarah, appreciate that. So the consensus is that we'd ask the committee the subcommittee to go back and review these 3 recommendations for revisions, and tighten up the language, and then come back in next meeting.
I think Marv, also the subcommittee wanted to hear from Jay and David from a board perspective. That request was also put in the chat. And then I wanted to ask everyone's thoughts on, after this, moving on to action items for our subcommittees, and then the next proposed date of when we're going to meet.
Okay. All righty. Jay, David?
I'll go first. So yeah, I sit here as a policymaker, and my other big role is to take care of the budget. And when we start talking about all meetings and providing interpretation services, we run into a challenge with our budget. Obviously, we can get it done. Some of the challenges we ran into with meetings over the past couple months was we scheduled our interpreters till a certain time, and our meetings went an hour longer. So telling an interpreter you're going to be there from 3 to 6, and our meeting goes till 7, and when we reach 7 o'clock and our meeting's not over and we go till 8, it's not respectful of their time. So there are just a few challenges, and I think the board is supportive of doing this. We just have to work out the budget parameters and the logistics of the logistics of making it work. And this is a community committee, so that's why I haven't been interjecting. So you all put forward the policy, and then the board will come up with a solution.
I'll just say briefly that, yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of good points made. Ivania, I guess I just wanted to say that I really hear you on, yeah, really ensuring that all meetings are accessible in this way. So yeah, I think we need to find a way to make this work. But I'm also looking to see what the subcommittee comes back with.
Thank you, David. Okay, so we'll have the subcommittee look at this, and we'll come back and look at these.
Can we approve the graduation? That seemed like think there was any challenges to that one. Is it possible to take a motion a second and vote on approving that one?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's look at that one. No. Sure, I think that's a good one there, Jay. Just need a motion for approval to take it forward to the board in a second, and we can vote on it. Do I hear a motion? Whoa, okay. Not hearing a motion, I would we would have to defer it to
I
the next.
make a motion
Okay.
to adopt policy 405 for the graduation with the included amended language. Is there a second?
Can you change the word adopt to recommendation?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you there, Reverend Simmons. Okay, it's been moved and properly second. Any more discussion on that particular issue? Hearing none, if you would, raise your hand for if you want to have this move forward for board consideration. Please raise your hand. And I'll give everybody about 35, 40 seconds so that Secretary Lynch can verify who's voted.
The motion passed.
All righty. So that particular recommendation will go to the board for consideration. Thank you. And Dawn, you'll share that particular language with David so he can take it forward to the board. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Alyssa, your recommendation was to move to action items. The only action item we have is to be able to make a presentation to Board of Education in June 2020 at their last meeting of June in 2020 to discuss all the progress that we've made over the course of the last year. Is there any discussion on that?
It's 2021.
I'm sorry, that's right.
Good catch. Good catch. I think also we need to make sure what do we want our subcommittees to come back with, to our next committee meeting as a whole with, and our next committee as a whole meeting date.
Okay. Let's see here. Well, we're committed to meeting minimally every other month. But I think we've agreed that we wanted to meet probably monthly here in the first year of the committee of the whole. Mr. Mason, what are the board dates of meetings? Is it the 13th and the 27th?
We have the 13th and the 27th.
Okay, so we would need to meet somewhere around the 20th.
Yeah, I thought, did we agree on the third Wednesday?
The third Wednesday, right. If we're going to meet every month, we would meet on the third Wednesday, correct. So the next board, our next committee of the whole meeting would be on January the 20th. Subcommittees would have to meet no later than the 8th.
Is a big part of the next meeting going to be getting through the rest of the subcommittee since we still have a lot to cover?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the bylaw subcommittee will, of course, come back with their two, and then the rest of the committees will brief on what we missed tonight.
I wanted to mention, I know that January 20th is the Board of Ed budget work session.
Oh,
I
it
don't,
is. Ooh.
I don't know that that keeps us from necessarily having Racial Equity Committee meeting that evening, but I wanted to mention that.
Okay. Look.
It'll be a long day if you're okay, David. Just have to eat dinner in between. Staff, Dr. Harris, Daryl, Jen.
I'm okay with the 20th.
Okay.
Okay. Is anybody not good with the 20th? If you are, please raise your hand. If you. So Alyssa, you have a problem on the 20th?
Oh no, me? I thought it was if we were good. No, I'm good. I'm good on the 20th.
Okay. All right. Now this one I wanted to know. I wanted anybody that couldn't do it. So yeah.
And the upcoming meetings for the third Wednesday of the month are already listed on the FCPS webpage. So January 20th, February 17th are already listed there as upcoming meetings.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And,
So
and I might suggest that for that 20th meeting that we do not have any presentations, because I think we need to get through this.
Mhm.
Thank you, Daryl. I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
And we want any revisions that any subcommittee wants to make. I will make a copy of this slideshow and I'll send it out to everybody. And that means that we would need to upload to Board Docs by January 6th, correct? Dawn, is that right?
I am not sure. Jay, when does I forgot her name. When does she want to have this?
I would say have it submitted for submitted to Catherine by January 8th.
January 8th? Okay.
So I'm going to put on here for subcommittees to send any revisions by at least January 7th. That would then give me a few hours turnaround to make sure I give it to Dawn to send it in.
Okay. So that means probably all the subcommittees need to meet next week or early the week of January the 4th. Okay. Short turnaround this time. Short turnaround this time. Okay. Well, a very lively discussion tonight. I think we see that we do have a lot of work to do, and I appreciate everybody's enthusiasm and especially your passion. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Is there anything else we need to discuss this evening that's very very critical? I know everybody's getting ready for the winter break, and hopefully that everybody will be safe and trying to deal with this pandemic that we've all been cursed with. But you know, hopefully we'll suffer through this one and we'll have a better one next year. So, okay. Anything else for the good of the body? Jay, if you and Sabrina and David and Dawn and Alyssa check your email. I sent you an email that we probably need to discuss maybe next week at an executive committee meeting if you guys have an opportunity, or we can do it a little bit later if you want to. But I did send you some information that you really need to know about. So,
okay.
So, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
Okay. All right. Is there a second? Second. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. All right. Well, everybody.